Welcome to Crossing Faiths. I'm John Pinna, and today we have a very special guest, Brother Michael Barton, who's a revert from Wichita, Kansas. And so, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know. I saw some of your videos online, and we've had some questions from our listener base about reverts in America, and I wanted to just be very careful. I don't want to bring somebody I knew, so that's why I reached out to you sort of cold, because what can be better than a guy from Wichita, Kansas? I mean, the center of Islam.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the community like out there? Is it a big community out there, or?
Yeah, for Wichita, we have Wichita State University, right? I don't know if you watch NCAA. We kind of got famous after the Shockers did better, so we got a little bit of fame from that. But we always had a pretty big university there, so we kind of have the college town thing, and then we also have a big aircraft industry here, like Boeing and Cessna or Textron, whatever they are now. We have that aircraft industry, so we would get a lot of international students would come to Wichita for college, then they would get hired either by the medical hospitals or by the aircraft industry, and then they would stay and then put down roots. And so we have one masjid that actually looks like a mosque with a big dome and everything, and then we have a couple of houses that were renovated, one in the 80s, one in the 90s, I think, to be masajid, but so we really have one that looks like a mosque that you can recognize. But as far as number of Muslims, probably 5,000, maybe even some people think maybe closer to 10,000 Muslims total in Wichita, really? Kansas. Yeah. More than people expect, I think.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, well, from a sports perspective, when you're talking about college, as a New Yorker, everybody's just the enemy. So, that's how we look at things. But yeah, no, sports are big out there. So I can imagine you'd have a very, a strong community. I mean, I went out to Athens, Ohio once. And I had to fly into Columbus, and I know that's not your neck of the woods, but it's middle of America, so for a New Yorker, it's kind of similar. And we kept driving down the freeway, and as we were driving down the freeway, there was all this signage on the barns, and it's like, he's coming, and then I was like, and then it's like he's it's right upon us, and I'm like, what's going on? And then it was like, Jesus, right? It's all these barns. And then I'm like, and I was with a colleague of mine because we were doing a speech at Athens College, or I guess it was University of Ohio, Athens. And I go, is there going to be like a roadblock? I think, and he's like, what are you talking about? I go, it's a lot of signage, and like, is there going to be a convergence, of like a Jesus thing? And he was like, no. He's like, I don't think so. I think it's just signage. I go, and he's like, but now that you mention it, I'm kind of worried. I'm like, and are we trying? It's just one of those funny things, but. That's my image of Kansas,
we're part of the Bible Belt, that's right. That's the thing. We're mostly, though, I mean, Wichita, you got to see a lot more Protestant. Even me, like I was raised going to a Methodist church, and that's kind of, we have a lot of kind of British and German Europeans were immigrated to Wichita. So you get a lot of either Methodists from the English, or you get maybe some Baptists from the German side there. Sure. We even have like Mennonites, and right outside of town we got some Amish, and so we got those communities here, but it's very more Protestant strong. Although we do have a lot more in Wichita after the 90s. We have a lot more Hispanic population too. We're not too far from Mexico, but so we do have a lot of immigrants too, and that increases the Catholic population.
Sure,
as well. So
nice. I mean, and so you were raised Methodist, so Protestant Methodist. So
yeah.
Okay, so and so like what, you converted, you're a revert to Islam, so went in 2006. But like, what was your church experience growing up? Like how did that, what was your connection to the church, like personally?
So, personally, I think I want to I separate between my connection to God and my connection to the church, because I felt like there was a difference kind of there. Like as a kid growing up, I used to love, the biblical epics. I used to love Charlton Heston and Ten Commandments. Used to watch that with my grandma every year.
Fun stuff, that's fun stuff. I always like to tell people, I always tell a little story about how, a friend of mine, I have 10% Jewish blood in me. And so we were chatting back and forth, and he goes, well, how did that happen? I go, I'd like to think that I might have been part of Pharaoh's chariots chasing, and then the sea was parted, and then I'm on the other side, and then the seas
Stuck.
close, and we just had to go along
You just
with
join them, yeah.
we had to go for 40 or 50 years, whatever it is, in the desert,
Yeah,
and we kind of had to go along with what was going on there. But
yeah.
not tell anybody that we were part of the Pharaoh's Chariot. I go, I don't know how we have to present, but so yeah, those movies were fun growing up.
Well, and I felt like something was there, like that's kind of how we're supposed to be, where we have this kind of dedication to God and following these commandments and that kind of stuff. But when we go to church with Methodist, it's pretty loose and laid back. I mean, you go in there, we would sing some hymns. The preacher would tell us some story, maybe read a Bible verse, and then connect it to something from his childhood or his personal life. And then they would tell us that we're forgiven, and then we'd go home. I kind of didn't feel like I was getting much of what I was looking for, more like 10 Commandments, and I'm getting the movie, I mean, and I'm not really getting that. And so I decided, well, I'm going to dig into like the Bible, and try to really see what's going on. And I remember reading in the Bible about the people. I started at the beginning of the Bible. I didn't kind of just jump around like kind of a church would just kind of have us jump around, read a passage here for today's theme or whatever. But I actually said, I'm just going to read it cover to cover. And sure. When I was reading in Genesis, I'd read about people like Abraham, and I thought Abraham was how we're supposed to be. Like, this is our model, but I didn't feel that at the church environment. I didn't feel like we're being like Abraham. I just felt like we're being Americans, and we go to this kind of service, and they make you feel good, and then you go home. And I didn't really feel I was getting what I was looking for.
Right. I mean, so did you explore other branches of Christianity? Did you look at others?
I had friends that were Catholic, so I joined them at their church, and they just seemed to have a more structured, strict liturgy, but they were still similar to Methodist. Methodist isn't too far off from the Catholicism as far as liturgy goes. It's still more traditional. We didn't have the rock bands, unless we had a guest rock band, but normally we didn't have the rock bands going on or that new modern positivity, feel goody stuff. It was still pretty traditional liturgy. But it wasn't as strict as the Catholics, So I'd go to that and kind of had some interest in that. I thought Judaism might be more my speed because of what I was reading in the Old Testament and liking that stuff. But I felt it was very tribal. It was kind of an ethnic thing more than something anybody could just join. I mean, you didn't get that vibe. And we don't have much of a Jewish community in Wichita either. So there's no real access. I mean, we have a synagogue or two. I think we have 2 or 3. But, they're not. People don't tell you they're Jewish, at least that much here in Kansas. So you didn't really have access to it anyway. But even the feel of it is that this is a specific tribe. This is something just for them. And so I was kind of feeling stuck. And on my faith journey, I just tried to be as good a Christian as I could, and get really into church. And they'd start having me reading Bible passages at church and that kind of stuff. And I was doing the candle lighting, and I was trying to get active there, but it just, it felt like not satisfying to me,
Right. Yeah. I mean, so you grow up in a Methodist church. I mean, it's not Pentecostal, so it's not like fire and brimstone. It's very comfortable, right? And so, what's the, leading up to 2006. So, maybe from 2001 to 2006, was there a ramp up there?
Yeah, definitely. So I go to college in 2000. I graduated high school, started college. And in college, I started taking like anthropology. I was really interested in anthropology and cultures and how people work and in group settings and that kind of thing. And so in anthropology, we would look a lot at how, people build cultures and how people build religions. And I started to kind of have this realization that, well, I could be something other than just a Methodist, or I could be something other than just a Christian too. And I was thinking that, just because I wasn't satisfied with Christianity doesn't mean there might not be something else out there, And so I said, there's a huge human plethora of options that I could maybe pull from. And so I was also into martial arts at the time. So I started looking maybe at Taoism or Buddhism. I thought maybe, okay, there's something maybe in the East because I like the martial arts. Maybe they got something there for me. But I felt something was missing with those, that they didn't have a theistic God, right? They don't have a personal God that really is connecting to you. It's more like the force, or something kind of distant, energy that makes the universe do what it does or whatever. And I wasn't satisfied with that either. So I kind of just became a deist, where I said, I know there's a God. I'm not sure. I think the religions are kind of seem to be man-made or man-influenced. I had done a lot of church history on my own because I was trying to like kind of dig at Christianity, get to the core of it. And I was frustrated with that too because I would see the updates, like they have these councils and they would come up with the Trinity or they would come up with different Christology over time, and so those things also frustrated me with Christianity because I see like all this input from humans on what's supposed to be something from our Creator. I thought, so I wanted something that was going to be directly from our Creator. I thought, right? So I met some Muslims in college for the first time. And, I was in my 20s. I kind of had started living the normal 20-year-old life. I'm going to nightclubs, we're drinking, we're trying to date as much as we can, and I meet these Muslims and they don't do that stuff. Like they don't go out and drink. They won't, like, they're not trying to date people. So I'm like, what's wrong with you guys? Like, why are you like, is something wrong? What's going on? You're like the extreme Christian guys we knew in high school that wouldn't date or, and I'm like, but you're not nerds. Christian. So I'm so confused,
Yeah. Yeah. They're nerds. They're not really.
Yeah. But they weren't awkwardly nerds. Like it was like natural for them to be pious because it seemed like when I met the evangelicals or whatever, they were kind of this nerdy, awkwardy piety. And you don't want that. I mean, you just felt like, it's not for me. But when I met the Muslims, they were naturally kind of pious and it was smooth. They weren't awkward, socially awkward or whatever, but they just were like, oh, we can't do that. It's haram for us. It's not allowed for us. And I just kind of wanted to know what made them tick. And since I had an interest in religion, I said, hey, let me grow you, because growing up in Wichita, zero about Islam.
Right.
If I had Muslims in high school, I didn't know it because they didn't tell anybody. I think we did have a couple of guys that joined the Latino club. I'm part Mexican. And we used to have some, I think whoever was maybe a Muslim, they would have to join the Latino club because that was the closest match, to, because they didn't have a club for them, So we had a couple guys, I think, that were maybe from Iran or Iraq or maybe, in high school, but they didn't talk about their religion at all. And so when I met these Muslims in college, they were telling me this stuff, and I just became interested. For me, I thought Islam was going to be Aladdin. I honestly thought that Islam was Arab mythology, just like, to me, Hinduism seems to be a lot of Indian mythology. And I thought, okay, Islam's going to be Aladdin, flying carpets, genies, Alibaba and his 40 thieves. That's what I expected, because
that's an interesting observation. It's a pop culture thing, and
exactly, yeah.
It's and you want to know what? It's a candid and admirable thing to say, because a lot of people wouldn't say that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I admit my ignorance.
Yeah.
But when I started asking them about their religion, expecting it to be that, they were telling me, oh, we believe in only one God that created the universe. We believe in Muhammad, but we believe in Jesus. We believe in Moses. We believe in Abraham. We believe in Noah. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Those are our guys. Like, how are you having these guys in your thing? Like, what is going on here? And so I became really interested in knowing more about Islam. So whenever I had an anthropology project, that was my major for a while. I ended up getting a degree in Spanish because I wanted a job. But your anthropology is really interesting. So whenever I had a project, I would pick Islam. So we did a project on food taboos. I picked Islam. We had a project on rituals and worship. I picked Islam. So I started trying to dig in to understand Islam because I was curious about it. And kind of part of my journey, what kind of got me to kind of start to click. In 2005, I had to go visit a religious center that I didn't grow up with. And so I went to the mosque. I chose the mosque I wanted to go see. And I remember I went up there and they were having a kind of like condolences dinner for somebody had just lost their wife, and they were feeding everybody basically. And I went.
You're learning about Islam, but you haven't gone to a mosque at all.
No, I hadn't gone to a mosque.
Okay.
No, even I never had the guts to go. And I remember being very nervous when I went there. Like, are they going to kick me out? Are they going to freak out if I come in there? Or what's going on in there? Are they slaughtering goats? I don't know. Right. I mean, it's really ignorant. I had no idea.
Right.
And so when I go in, I was immediately amazed by the diversity, like, of the population. That really stuck out to me, because what I saw a lot with churches was very much racial segregation, even cultural segregation. I'm going to the Methodist church. It's all WASPs. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or my friend, he was black, he would go to the black church, and no white people went there, and
Right.
So I was amazed by the diversity. I was seeing like all kinds of different peoples. And even when I sat down to eat, I'm sitting between a middle-aged guy from Pakistan and a teenager from Jordan who was, I think he was Palestinian, but he was, sent to Jordan or whatever. So I mean, that already was interesting to me. So I started, asking them questions and, kind of doing my paper, but kind of asking my own personal things. And, they tell
Sure.
me about God and the concept of God. And I was just like, in my mind, I'm like, wow, I already believe this. I agree with you. That's even what I got from the Bible when I read it, that God is one, God is perfect, God is not like the creation, then they're talking about Jesus, and while they were telling me about Jesus, this Palestinian guy walks up and he's like, hey, Jesus probably looked like me, not like the blonde guy they have on the painting, And I start laughing, because, I had seen the Malcolm X movie and he brought that up too, And so, I was like, yeah, that's true. It wouldn't be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white guy.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to them and I'm thinking, wow, this is really interesting. And then they did the adhan. And at that time, Wichita didn't finish the dome, the musalla area, the prayer area yet. They were all praying in a gym. So they rolled out these carpets and they all went to pray. And I'm watching them pray, and they stand and they bow and they go into prostration. And I started, like, internally, I'm thinking, like, this is how you worship God. Like, wow, that is worship. That is what, that's how the prophets worshiped. That's old time worship. Like,
Right.
they're not like we were doing in church where we just sing some songs that we picked and then we would pray to God to do stuff for us. I said, this is, devotion to God. It really stuck with me. And then afterwards, we were going through the buffet to get the food, going through the line. And the guy who lost his wife, he comes over and he grabs me and he's telling me, he's like, give this guy a bunch of food. He wants to be Muslim. And I was just like, I didn't say nothing, but I was just thinking like, no way. I'm thinking I'm not going to pick any religion. I'm just going to do like a buffet and pick what I want and live my
Right.
life, and so after that experience, it kind of was sticking with me more. And I started going back to my Muslim buddies at college and started kind of grilling them more. And they were like, well, we try to answer you, but they're like, we don't know everything that we're supposed to, like we're not the best Muslims we could be and knowledgeable as we should be. But they said, if you just go get a Quran go get a Quran translation, it'll explain everything to you.
Yeah.
And that really struck me because when I was growing up as a Christian, I remember being about like 13. I would just go grill my grandma because I just wanted to know more. And I'm trying to ask her all these questions like about God, about the afterlife, and she was kind of like, I don't really thought about this stuff. She's like, you can always ask the preacher. You can always ask the preacher. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get the Bible. It's God's word, right? So I'll just let God tell me all the answers,
Right.
and then I get the Bible and it's a lot of narratives and lineages and history of the Jews. And it does have some devotional things in there, but it wasn't really giving me what I expected it to give. Right. It was
Sure.
more of a narration, like a third person narrative about people getting revelation, but it didn't feel like it was kind of revelation from God. And so when I went and got the Quran, I started reading that. And by the time I got to like Al Imran, like the second or third chapter, I was like, this is what I expected the Bible to be like. This is my creator talking to me.
Hmm.
I would have questions come to my mind and the book would answer me. It would
Yeah.
raise points, it would use rhetorical things. And then I would be like, oh, you're making me, like, I'm interacting with this book. Like, it was really an amazing experience.
Sure.
And so I was really blown away with that. And so in 2006, Ramadan was coming, and I knew my Muslim buddies, they would fast. So I said, guys, I'm going to fast with you this time, right? I'm going to do it with you. And so I didn't eat. I think I was still drinking water because I didn't know the rules. The fiqh wasn't there.
Yeah.
and also, but I was trying to do it. And then they told me we're about halfway through, or actually about close to the end. It was about, because I became Muslim the 20th of Ramadan in '06. So it was kind of almost 2/3 through. They said, why don't you come break your fast at the mosque with us?
Right. Iftar. Yeah.
Yeah, you iftar. Yeah. And so I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I can do that. I didn't know, I'm not a Muslim yet,
Right.
They're like, no, come on in. Well, I go there, and when I go, I couldn't find my friends because we went separate. I came on my own, and so I couldn't find them. And then I go in there, and I'm getting food, and everybody thinks I'm already Muslim. Now, I had like a goatee at the time. I'm part Hispanic, so I got some dark hair. So I think people thought
Right.
maybe I'm Lebanese or Syrian already. I'm already Muslim, People are telling me salam alaikum. I'm like, yes, hello, yes, to you too, I don't know what to say back, And then I'm eating, and then one of my friends sends their dad to talk to me. And the dad comes over and he's like, oh, my kid from school, they say, do you like Islam? I said, oh yeah. I said, I agree with you guys that there's only one God. I'm reading the Quran. I'm fasting. I like all this stuff. And he's like, come with me. And he took me to the office. And so we go to the office, and then they bring the director of the board of administration. He comes, sits down, and there's like an office manager lady there. And then he starts saying to me, like, what do you know about Islam? I said, it's beautiful. I love it. I love you guys' concept of God. Your rules make sense. I love the fasting and your worship. I said, everything just looks right, And then he was like, so you want to be Muslim? And I was like, yes. And I was like, whoa, what did I just say? Like, what was that?
Right.
And then they got excited. They start cheering. They give me a gift bag.
Sure.
And he's like, I'm going to take you to show you how to wash, like make wudu. And then he said, you're going to come pray. And then you're going to do your shahada in front of everybody. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on.
Sure.
And I go in there, we wash, and then we go, I just follow along on the salah. And then he pulls me up in front of, and at that time, the Wichita community was smaller. We still had like 700 people, men, in the Friday night, Ramadan Tarawih. We still had that many. And so I do my shahada, and then all these dudes come up and hug me, and I'm just like kind of like overwhelmed. I don't know what's going on. And I remember when I was doing the shahada, still at that time, I had no problem with the la ilaha illallah. I said, I totally have always believed that. I never accepted Trinity. I never thought Jesus was God. I always felt that was mythology influenced, Greco-Roman. I remember being like, even in 5th grade, reading mythology in the school library. And I was like, wow, this sounds like church. Some of this stuff, like God having a kid, Zeus having sons, and they go and save the world, And so I was just like, so I always had a problem with that stuff too of Christianity. I felt it was kind of Greco-Roman influenced, and church history kind of reinforced that for me.
Yeah. Question about this is always a big one, like, because the rejection of Jesus or the idea of the Trinity, that because in Islam, that Hazrat Isa is the focus is the priesthood, right? It's the idea of the coming of the Messiah, the rejection of the Messiah, which is the same story. It's just the act of God coming down to kill himself to save us from himself is peculiar.
Yes,
very peculiar.
at the least, yeah.
So it's such a strange, and the God man concept is strange too, because
it seems contradictory. I mean, it's contradictory,
right? God is love, and I always say in Islam, God is mercy. I always say that there's 100 names of Allah, but mercy is like the big one, right?
Yeah.
So it's everyone kind of gets saved. Whereas if we love is a part of it, but when it comes to a practice, and then it's really important that your God is merciful rather than anything else, because it's a supreme being. But so like maybe unpack that a little bit. The idea, I mean, so that because you grew up Christian, and so like a lot of our multi-faith sort of listeners would be like, well,
I wasn't a true Christian. That's what I get a lot.
They'll say, he was there at Ramadan. He wasn't planning on taking the Shahada. I would look at it as being like very organic. You're on a faith journey. You're being very judicious. At least this is how it comes across. You're being very judicious, and you're kind of like studying faiths. You're considering yourself as a deist. You're interacting with Muslims, but your friends said read the Quran. It's they weren't like, you want to be Muslim, come with us. I think Muslims in general are very, very nervous about anybody who says that. So, so you start learning the Quran yourself. There's a point where you're visiting the masjid during Ramadan. Was there, while you were going through that process, the train was sort of leaving the station, was there a moment of nervousness, that you're making the wrong decision? You're looking back at it now, but just maybe, talk about some of the feelings there, because I know a lot of people that are listening will say, oh, he was pressured by the board,
or
and now he's, he can't turn back,
no.
because he's, Wichita's a small community. What are you going to do?
And that's the thing. When I first became Muslim, right, I do my shahada, and I was, talking about too, the La ilaha illallah, I always believed that, even when I was Christian or whatever. The Muhammad Rasulullah, I didn't know enough about Muhammad to say that. Here we don't learn about Muhammad at all. Like in history class, even though he's one of the most significant historical figures, we skip him. We do Egypt, Greece, Rome, and then Columbus discovers the New World, and go from there.
Right. So, and it's funny too, because there's people that we have the Quran, right? But we have the Sunnah and the Hadiths, right? So the Sunnah,
Yeah.
the way the Prophet lived, and the Hadiths, so the sayings. And there's a process to verify the Sunnah and the Hadiths because Muhammad, peace be upon him, was alive, and
Yeah.
then he had surrounded himself with people who we know,
Yeah.
and there's a verification process of the Sunnah and Hadith. So there's there's a tremendous amount of information that's not really hearsay. It's primary
Right.
source
Yes.
information.
Rigorously. Yeah.
And it's and before something becomes a hadith, a saying, I mean, of course, some of them are interpretive and some of them are,
Yeah.
we're not sure, but it's verified by the ummah in general and scholars in general, and there's a consensus before it becomes minted as
Yeah, we've always had a critical process, which you didn't
yeah,
always have that in other religions. But we've always had
yeah,
that from the
which is
beginning. Yeah.
yeah, and so from that perspective with Christianity it's tough because we got Jesus, and then none of the apostles wrote anything.
Right.
There's it was such an odd element. I know when we get to Christian apologetics, they talk about, well, there's so much information floating around and this and that and everything else, but the reality is that no one really wrote anything down until later. And then there was a lot of stuff that came out that was established within the establishment of the church and bureaucracy of the churches that existed at that time. Was that something that came to play because you were very judicious
Yeah.
about what is and what isn't? And so was it helpful to have like the Sunnah and Hadith?
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's something that attracted me to Islam is that you have, sources that is what you base everything on. You're not basing it on later people thinking of stuff and coming up with ideas and developing everything you're going to say something in Islam, you got to bring a source for it. You
Right.
got to bring
The
scripture
evolution
for
of
it.
the church becomes the thing
Yeah.
where we have the Great Schism, which is the Eastern
Oh,
Orthodoxy,
yeah.
and then obviously the Reformation, and then everything's birth from the Reformation is on the Protestant side. You got all that stuff going on.
Yeah.
And even the Anglican Church, right? So you have the Pope, then you have the King of England, and then you have the Episcopal Church, which is they don't have the King of England. They're in America.
Yeah.
So it's like this. There's always this arc of evolution, and so
Right.
specificity was appealing to you.
Yes, and I felt Christianity worked backwards. They would get a belief and then they would look for something to support it. And I
Right.
felt like Islam would get their beliefs from the sources. And I
Sure.
felt that's what you should be doing. I mean, that's what makes sense. And honestly, I didn't find when I became a Muslim, everything Islam is teaching, the Bible is also teaching that, but just sometimes the Bible has things that contradict itself. And so it
Sure.
gets muddied. But the message is clear. There's only one God. You have to live your life how God wants you to live your life if you want to be successful and be right with God. I mean, it's very straightforward. And I guess what every prophet taught, and even the Bible was showing that as well. So I didn't see, I saw Islam as a revival of what Jesus taught, of what Moses taught, that had been muddied by people getting their hands in it. And Islam was a restoration of that. And so that was exactly what I was looking for, because I knew there's something good here. Even as a Christian, when I was watching the Ten Commandments, there's something good here. It's touching my heart, but it's all muddy. It's been affected by human influence, and I felt like Islam was a restoration of that, and that's what made me say this is what I was looking for. I wanted that pure, return to God's message, to the message of the prophets, and I got that. I felt like from Islam. Now, my first year, I wasn't perfect. I'm a human, and it's a big change to go from normal American life to being a practicing Muslim. Now, at first, I was very into it. Like at first Ramadan and the first couple months after Ramadan, I'm all in. No more going out with my friends. No more pork. But I had an issue too, because the community, the only classes they were having for reverts was Alif Ba Ta, like learn the Arabic.
Oh, yeah.
And so I go there and I'm taking classes Alif Ba Ta. Like, this doesn't build faith. This doesn't build your devotion to God. It's a tool to help you understand text in their original form. But this is not what I think you should start with new people. So I'm there doing that. And, I start to feel lonely because I cut off my friends. I stopped dating. So I go to the mosque. I talk to some guys there, and it's a little awkward for me because of, I'm American. They have a different culture. I don't know the adjustment to like Muslim adab, like proper manners. So I'm talking loud. Maybe I'm cussing. And they're just like, you're not supposed to be like that here. And so I just keep feeling like frustrated, like, oh, I'm messing up again. Oh, I did this wrong. Oh, I made this mistake. And, I started to say like, go back, it'd be a lot easier. I go out with my friends and I can go out and just relax. So I go out with my friends and, I'm like, okay, we're just going to have dinner and then I'm going to go home. And they're like, whoa, just hang out with us a little bit longer. Or you can come with us to the bar, but don't drink. Oh, okay. Yeah. I did that for a little while, but then I started falling back to old habits. And I started kind of falling off. I was praying really regular and then I started falling off on that. And then, I was just, and then I was not feeling happier. I was feeling worse because I felt like a hypocrite. And then
Sure.
my next Ramadan came, and I was telling my buddies, I said, guys, I can't come out with you anymore. Ramadan's next week. I gotta, stop going out. I'm gonna go do Ramadan again. I'm gonna get serious. And they're like, oh, okay, do what you got to do, man. We respect that. So and I remember that first year I would be with my friends drunk arguing theology, telling them why
Right.
Islam is true, and I'm drunk, like subhanAllah, right? And then they don't know what to answer. They're like, wow, that makes a lot of sense, but they're drunk too, and we're not getting
Right.
anywhere. They don't remember in the morning, But finally that second Ramadan comes, I went to Taraweeh. I kind of had this breakdown moment. I started bawling, and I said, I really believe in this, but I've got to do it too. Like I can't just have it be something I believe and then I live my life. I was like, I need to be, I want to be all in on this. I can't stand being hypocritical with myself,
Sure.
So after that, I got pretty serious. I mean, I'm still human. I still make mistakes or whatever, but I stayed pretty consistent and I started really to pursue knowledge in Islam too. I didn't just want to be an average Muslim, just go to my mosque and go home. And I wanted to really know this faith, and I wanted to be able to explain it and defend my decision too to people. So I really went all in, and it was really nice because the local scholar there, probably I was maybe one more year. The first year I just kind of started making friends at the mosque. I found some other college guys, but they were devout, so I kind of got in good with them. And then the next year, the local scholar I went to his class and he noticed I was a very active student. I'm taking all the notes. I'm remembering the information, going home, reviewing it. So he kind of took me under his wing and started helping me, hey, you could take notes for the class, and you kind of making me feel like, oh, wow, I'm special, partly because I was a revert. I mean, that is, you do stand out when you're the revert guy. I was kind of becoming the poster boy for reverts there at our mosque, but he took me under his wing, and I really benefited a lot from studying directly with a scholar, for years and years. People ask me, they're like, how do you know what you know if you're a revert? I said, because I had, direct one-on-one for really steady 9 years solid or so of
it's a disservice to a lot of Muslims, because when you're born into it, and you don't go through the rigorous training or a scholarly training, or have access to a scholar. A lot of people just are in practice. They practice the fundamental. And so they'll salat out 5 times a day. They'll do this. There's zakat and all this other stuff. But they a lot of times, for the first Muslims that you were chatting with, your colleagues in school, they were like, well, we're not really great Muslims. We can't really explain it. And so
we just do it.
Yeah. Which is fine, because but it's an interesting arc, because you didn't just become Muslim, right? You actually now have a TikTok channel. You explain Islam and are very forward, because you could just be salating out, doing your own thing, and have your career, and no one would know about it. In Ishmaelism, my sect, we do what's called chast, which is different levels of attainment, like bar mitzvahs over the course of time, all the way up to when you turn 21, right? So you got to hit all these sort of high points, and if you don't, you're not on the path, right? So and so to attainment, right? So like when we met, I said assalamu alaikum, and I went like this one. So it's the same thing, peace be upon you, but then the hand of God with you, hand of Allah be with you, right? So that's and if we were overseas, I'd say Rafiq. I'd be like, which is like comrade would be the translation of that, So that's a very, Rafiq is a term that's used by the community, right? Which is unique to us, right? So but so you're internally Muslim now. You're working with a scholar, but then now how do you get from there to broadcasting Islam and Islam? Because that's a huge jump from Wichita, Kansas. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
There.
Right. So basically it was, a lot of it was the scholars doing. Sheikh Hilali, Muhammad Hilali, Hafidhullah, may Allah preserve him. He moved away from Wichita after COVID. They kind of we had to like they did a bunch of layoffs at our masjid or whatever. And so he went and he got a job in Phoenix. Now he's in a much bigger community and benefiting a lot more people. But anyways, he always pushed me. So I was attending his classes, and he knew I was actually a teacher. I'm an educator by profession. So I was a Spanish teacher, but teaching is teaching at some level. And he knew I was a teacher. He knew I was really serious about the classes. I wasn't perfect, but he saw I was, striving to get better all the time. And so he asked me to work with the youth group. And so they brought me in, and there was one of the local heart doctors. He had started the youth group, and he brought me in, and he'd have me talk to the guys. But since I was like in my 20s, they would pay a lot more attention to what I said than what, the middle-aged doctor was saying. And I would also kind of break it down for them in a way they could kind of understand better, because our cultures were more like me being raised American and they're being raised American, because they're all second generation or sometimes third generation Muslims. And so they were really kind of getting into what I was saying. And that also, since I had to start preparing stuff for the youth group, that pushed me to learn a ton, because you don't want to look like ignorant when you get up to teach in front of people. You're like, I got to know all my stuff, and I got to know what questions they're going to ask and how to answer them. And so I just started, all my free time almost becomes researching and reading. And, and I started off with prophet stories, because I said, I love the prophets, even when I was not a Muslim. And, so those were something that was just fascinating to me. So I just started doing the prophet stories. I started going through Adam and going through all of them and showing them the continuity of the religion, showing them the universality of the religion. And that started to grow there. Then the sheikh started having me do short talks after Isha to everybody. And that was scary for me, because I said, okay, I can talk to teenagers because I know more than them. But I said, all these adults are going to be like, who's this? What's this guy up here talking to us? We remember your Shahada. You just did it a few years ago. How are you talking to us? So I was a little intimidated, but I started doing that, and everybody's like, that was nice. That was concise and good and clear, and you explain it well. And so then by about 2011, so I started doing the youth. So I become Muslim in 06. Yeah. I started doing the youth group 2010. And I started doing the khataras a little bit end of 2010, 2011. And then I did my first khutbah at the end of 2011. And oh my gosh, that was scary. But that day was, it's 11/11/11 was the date. And it was the day I first heard my son's heartbeat, my first son's heartbeat. We went with my wife to the sonogram. And then I gave my first khutbah that afternoon. So that is a huge day for me personally. And I gave my first khutbah. It was, it was rough. But everybody said it was good. Like, it wasn't bad. It was just rough,
What was the subject?
I said, who are the people that Allah says he loves in the Quran? And then I went through all the different times where Allah talks about that Allah loves the muhsineen, Allah loves the muttaqeen. And I went through those verses and kind of just did a English breakdown of those verses like that. And everybody said, no, it was good. And they said, next time you should do the ones Allah's angry with. I said, oh, maybe, maybe not. And so then the sheikh, the scholar, he started having me do a khutbah. Like, I was still working at that time I was working at the public school. And he was having me do the khutbah like whenever we had a holiday, because I would be able to go. Because I was doing Jummah at the public school with all the Muslim kids that were going to the public school, high school kids. But I couldn't lead it because I was a state employee. So I would print them out something, and then they would read the khutbah, and then I would follow them in Salah, and we were getting our Jummah in that way. But I started doing khutbahs on a regular basis. Then in 2014, they needed a new principal for the Islamic school here. And I wasn't interested. I had the best job. I was teaching ESL newcomers, high school. I had really small classes. The kids were all respectful and needed to learn English, so they were engaged. It was the easiest, most beautiful job in the public school system. And I loved my coworkers. I had no desire to leave that job, but they came to me and they said, we need a principal. You have an education background. But I was like, I don't want to be an admin. I'm a teacher. But they said, no, we need a principal. Our principal, he was like in his 70s, and they're like, we need somebody to phase in, you can learn from him, and then kind of take over. And so I kept saying no, but they kept asking me. And then, I kind of talked it over with my wife, and I, like the istikhara, and I was like, I think Allah wants me to go there. So I ended up becoming the principal there at the Islamic school. And then that led me to doing khutbahs like every month. And then I started doing adult classes at the masjid, like on the weekends. And then COVID came in 2020. Okay. And when COVID came, everything shut down. So I'm not teaching anymore. No classes. But I had to Zoom for the school. Sure. And so I started doing these Zoom videos because I was teaching like the 8th grade Islamic studies. I was principal, but I also taught one class of Islamic studies. And so I would Zoom that. And then my wife was like, have you seen TikTok? You could put this stuff on TikTok. I said, TikTok is just kids dancing. No way. Ain't nothing on there, informative or beneficial. It's just people, shaking their bottom and that's it. And she said, no, look, and she showed me some Muslim guys on there talking. So I put a couple of rough, really rough 1 minute videos. They're horrible, but people started liking them and they were happy to have something good, positive on
Yeah.
TikTok. And so then I started making TikToks basically. And then on TikTok, I was growing really fast at that time. In 2020, there wasn't a lot of Muslim content, so I was growing really fast on TikTok. And then I did a debate with a ex-Muslim Christian preacher versus ex-Christian Muslim preacher. Right? We did this
Right.
debate. I have the clips of it on YouTube. And he didn't. It wasn't really a debate though. It was nice. We did like a dialogue. So we would each talk about a question for like 10 minutes. I wanted to keep it civil. I thought, debates usually just end up ugly and
Yeah.
get more benefit if you just have more of a dialogue.
Sure.
And so we did that dialogue, and one of the biggest Muslim TikTokers, he came and watched my debate because I had asked his wife, because I didn't have him. He didn't follow me at that time. I was nobody to him. And I asked his wife was following me, and I said, "Hey, how does your husband do the debate thing? I don't know how to set it up because I'm getting older, middle aged here. I don't know how to do technology anymore." And she had him reach out to me, and he told me how to do it. And then he tuned in, and then he started promoting me. He brought me on his live, and then I got pretty big on TikTok relatively. I got 100 and some thousand followers, but I know there's people on with millions and all that. But and then after TikTok, I started doing other social media like Instagram and YouTube, but I still kind of found my niche at doing like the 1 minute, 2 minute kind of quick excerpts, and that's all people have attention span for anymore nowadays, anyway.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's. I mean, it's a really organic sort of way travel, journey, and so it was one of those things where I think one of the reasons why I reached out to you is not that you're public, and you're confident, and the idea that reverts are somehow it's predatory or coercive. I was like, I was funny. I was talking with a Muslim colleague of mine, and he's like, I go, well, I got to reach outside of my circle, and that's why, like I said, I reached out to you. But I go, it can't be easy to be in Kansas, and be out that way. I'm up in Kingston, New York. I'm an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 20 minutes north of the city, and there's not a lot of Muslims up here, right? And there's one and it's an African American mosque, which is fine. It's not but it's very steeped in sort of what's it called, the Nation of Islam, which is a little different. So that's there's a social element to it. There's all kinds of other stuff. And I'm not, I know that I'm not saying it's just a different brand. And so going in, sometimes you're like trying to figure out what the social issue is.
Right.
Like I don't have an opinion about that, or I'm just coming to Salat out. I'm not, I don't want to get involved in whatever
the activism or whatever.
I don't. And I'm a government, I'm a government relations guy, so I don't get involved in that stuff. I work in process, So, but it's funny because there's you're very active. You're out there. You're a revert, and the idea of someone like you promoting from way out in the middle of nowhere, don't take that the wrong way.
The Bible Belt. We're on the buckle of the Bible Belt. Yeah.
Yeah, Muslim in the Bible Belt. I mean, there's the title of your book, just so you know. That's it, Muslim in the Bible Belt. It's profound because you had to really own your identity to not just go to Jumu'ah prayer and practice the fundamentals, but to step out and then on top of that, go online. There's a lot to that. I mean, I know from running the podcast that you're I would say target, but you become very critical of yourself, trying to figure out, you don't want to be defensive of anything. You're trying to just share, and then all of a sudden you're getting something
attacked. Oh yeah. As I said, I'm glad it happened when it happened. I mean, if I had been earlier in Islam or something, I wouldn't have known how to handle all the attacks and all that. It might have overloaded me, and I would have failed and had to quit. Or I don't know. Allah Alam, you don't know how you would react or whatever. But alhamdulillah, was the time it happened. At least I had enough of a background, enough of experience that I didn't just crumble under all the, bombardment from
Well,
online. So many
and you're an
trolls.
educator. You're an educator too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So you're used to being in front of a class, and you're used to being
yeah.
like,
That helps.
you have the attendant nerds, and then you have the guys on the phone, and then you have a guy that says, "Really, is it like the?" So when it comes to some of the criticisms and some of the stuff, I mean, you're now like since 2006, so you're 20 years you're in Islam, but what's like right now, how do you feel about what's the good, the bad, and the ugly with your journey as you see it? Like what do you what would be like if you're looking back and you're saying, some of the criticisms are rough, or maybe they're not. When it comes to your online community and the community that you're stewarding, are you still the principal?
Yes, yeah. Still,
Okay.
still going there. Yeah. I think, like we said, good, bad, and ugly. I mean, definitely within Muslim communities, at least I see it, but everybody else tells me the same kind of things. You have kind of power troubles, power struggles, power trips, with Muslim boards and people trying to control things and do the mosque how they think it should be done from back home, or how they think it should be done and their own idea. You have those kind of struggles that Muslim communities face. I think all nonprofits face that at some level, but
Sure.
especially religious nonprofits face that a lot with the power struggles and people, power tripping when they have those things, and they can put you off from doing service and from wanting to be productive and supportive. And I kind of, in a way, it's sad too. I thought online too was a way for me to have a free platform where I don't have anybody uh, bugging me about how I'm doing or what I'm doing it, or do it this way, or I mean, it's like I got to be independent, and that was kind of a nice thing too. But I mean, I'm still within the masjid. I'm good at playing the game and staying within the lines. Push it a little
Sure.
bit, but I stay within the. I know how to I know how to follow the rules and stay on the
Sure.
road. So I'm able to function as well. But you get a lot of frustration with dealing with people and egos and that kind of stuff. And online, you have a little bit more freedom with that. And I try to make sure I know my stuff before I open my mouth. That's a big
Sure.
thing too. If you're just talking out of nowhere, like you can't do that, especially when it comes to the religion. You got to have some some proof for what you say, which is something that I always liked about it.
Sure. I mean,
For
the COVID really profoundly changed Islam. It really
yeah,
did. I mean, one of the, and when I say that, I was just chatting with somebody maybe a couple months ago about it, and they were like, well, how? Give us one example. And I go, we have this thing called zakras in Shiism, right? So it's female imams, and the women were able to hit the airwaves and
yeah, yeah,
and really took the reins of stewarding a substantial part of the Muslim community globally, and now that hasn't died. That's now
right,
flourishing. A really amazing moment
yeah,
in Islamic, sort of Islamic history, and I think people undercut that. You now have this just as many female sort of zakaras, whether they're Sunni or Shia, out there
yeah,
and speaking. And so maybe this is a good question to ask you. As a homegrown Muslim, right, in
yeah,
America, when you're confronting the overseas imams who come from a homogeneous environment from a Muslim majority country, has there been criticism, or has there been nothing, or is there a clash? Because sometimes there's a clash of like everybody has to be from the source that's overseas.
yeah. I've had some, not a lot, but I've had some kind of accusation. Oh, you're too lenient, or you're too easy on the people just because they're in the minority setting, or they, But I think there is a lot of stuff built into Islamic law, into Sharia, into fiqh, that allows concessions and kind of ease for the people. And that's one of the things that it's a maqasid of fiqh, that you difficulty begets that you make it
Yeah.
easy for the people.
Right.
That's built into the system. But they'll say, oh, you're jumping to make it easy too fast, or you don't like. I don't see that as contrary to that's Islam has always been that way.
Sure.
Great scholars have always tried to make, they say great scholars are hard on themselves and easy on the people. And I think
Right.
that's true. I think that's been our tradition, is that, you try to make it's something livable for people where they're at, and make it doable for people without breaking the red lines. I mean, we always have red lines you don't cross, but there are some times where you can have some adjustments, and you don't want to, if you try to do overseas say overseas, but if you try to do like a too strict of an Islam, and then you're sending these young people out into the American society, and everything's the exact opposite of that, they
Yeah.
just going to start having this internal conflict, or they're going to be like, okay, this is just ridiculous over here, way too strict. You've got to be able to show them where the red lines are, show them where the flexibility is, and be a dynamic, nuanced, support for the Muslim community. You can't do that if you're super rigid. I know people feel safe when they're rigid. They feel, oh, I know the rules is black and white. There's no flexibility. I know
Sure.
exactly what to do every situation. But that's not, doesn't work for humans. Honestly, most of the time. Like you said, we're not robots. We're not, we need that built in, So I've had some of that, but not a lot, because I do try to stick to the, orthodox positions and this kind of thing for Sunni Islam, so I don't go crazy. But I still, even my teacher was like that. He taught, that's the thing too. You got to learn from a teacher, not just from a book. The book is going to give you the black and white, here's the rules, but you got to see it implemented with a person in real time. I used to love to watch him answer people's questions and, solve people's problems, and it was just, that was as much beneficial for me as studying the book of fiqh or studying some text on Islamic law or whatever. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that, because it's one of those things where it's always difficult. Like I would get that, even though or like you said, I used to arbitrate Islamic law and do things overseas. I still get the thing. It's like, well, you're in America, you're lenient because of this or you're that. I'm like, there were no Muslims when Islam started. That's what I always tell people. They're like, what do you mean? Like, it's easy now that you're in a Muslim majority country, that it's easy when you hear Azan all the time. We don't hear here. There's a lot of bells. There's a lot of bells, and none of them are in sync. There's different tunes here in Kingston, New York, with all the bells. You know what I mean? So so I explained to them. I go, look, when there was no Islam, when Islam first started, we had to be engaging. We had to be. We had to compromise. We had to reach out to communities and have external communities steward us. And those are still baked. It's not something that's baked in, and it's implicit. It's explicit, so I have this book, right, that I always grab, because I do advocacy for religious minorities all over the world, and so I had a problem with this, that the Assyrians were getting persecuted by Muslims in Kurdistan, and so I shake my head. I go, what do you mean? And they go, well, no, they're, Assyrians, Muslims, there's been conflict for a long time. And I go, what? I go, what do you mean? And they go, no, they're persecuting us. I go, they can't. And she goes, why? And I go, well, because there's a treaty that the Prophet signed for Muslims to protect the Assyrians. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I go, and so I have this book. It's called
Covenant from
right. But in here is there's a whole chapter. There's the monks of Mount Sinai. There's this and that, but there's a whole chapter on just the Assyrians, and there's a chapter on the Armenians. And guess what? Those treaties still exist. Like the treaty with the Assyrians is in the archives in Istanbul, and there's a copy of it that was transcribed by the Prophet's scribe that the head of the Church of the East, the patriarch, has. And everybody's like, what? And I go, yeah. I was like, so if there's a Muslim persecuting Assyrians, they're not only going against Islam, they're going against the Prophet. It's very explicit. And so I go, most of the problem is it's like a lot of practicing Muslim people born into Islam, they're not aware of this stuff. So it's not, so there's an element of becoming aware, but then there's but also on the receiving end, the Church of the East, they're unaware of it. It's just a historical document archive somewhere. And so I go, there's well-established multi-faith engagement. There's well-established the whole idea of no compulsion, or children or people of the book, and all this other business, right, in the Quran. That all that stuff is not only in existence, it's alive, and it's and it's faith in action. And if you don't know it, then you need to know it. But once you do know it, you got to drop your weapon. You got to stop. Enough's enough,
Well, I don't know if you guys have that in the Ismaili community, but we also have a tendency where people only teach ibadat and they don't teach mu'amalat when they teach the masses. We just teach them how to pray and fast and give zakah and go to Hajj and they don't know how to do business dealings ethically. They don't know how to deal with people from different culture, different religions. They don't know how
Right.
to have a good marriage, even, because all we're teaching
Sure.
them is ibadat. Like, the muamalat is as much a part of Islam as the ibadah, And so I think that is the issue that gets glossed over, and people just, they say, oh, that's advanced. Like, people need to know how to have a marriage, a healthy marriage. That's not
Yeah.
advanced. Like, that's basic living your life,
Right. And if you're Muslim, you need to have that, background of like, just like, there's the fundamentals, but then there's the basics, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that people are teaching from their heart. Like, we're lucky, we're a small community. So we have but we're also, believe in the stateless state, and being, global, but and having self-service, and we have a sort of different kind of community, because of the closeness, and then the communication, and of course we have the living imam, who's not a prophet, but the Aga Khan, who's recently just passed away, and now his son took over. So we have a sort of a hereditary element that's like a living imam that translates the word to the present day, right? So we're lucky, right? From that perspective, which may or may not be, haram. We don't know. Okay, so it may have, but according to the Amman message and the Amman conference, we're mainstream Islam on there's 4 schools of Shia and 4 schools of Sunni, right? So, and that's mainstream, and everybody might be Muslim, but they're not mainstream. And so, so and that's something, that we take into heart. But the idea that we're not dipping into the history, and not dipping into the example. And so, like, I'm very passionate. I'm like, well, look, like, the Sunnah isn't just how the Prophet lived to make yourself look cool. Okay, so so here's the thing. It's like here's a whole book, right, on the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad. Right here, this is a whole book on it, and this is nothing, right, compared to what there is. But this is like should be standard reading. Like, this is
right,
because it's the words of the Prophet in action.
Right.
I mean, treaties he wrote. It's like, there's no guesswork, and it's like, this is what you do. This is how you do it here. This is what's going on here, and this is how you guys interact. And I was like, in the treaty, it's like once a year the Syrians and the Muslim community are supposed to meet. I was like, are you guys doing that? And then I'm like, because you could say, you could say the Prophet Muhammad, and you could say peace be upon him, but he said, now you guys are charged with meeting them once a year to figure out what's going on. Like, I'm not, but you are, and so and they're like, oh, I guess so. I guess we got to do it. And guess what? It's
you
not.
Guess so, yeah.
Well, this is the funny thing. It's so Prophet Muhammad. He's like, you meet once a year. You meet here at this, like, the specific place.
Yeah.
It's. I was like, there's no guesswork in Islam. It's all right there.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't understand what you guys are doing. And so. And I think that's like one of those amazing moments when it comes to interacting amongst Muslims. It's like, I are talking about the fundamentals, which is one thing, but the basics, and then understanding the history, and understanding what the prescriptive elements are. I mean, there's a treaty that's contextualized to dealing with a multi-faith community in Iraq that's relevant today.
Yeah.
Like, it blows your mind, and it's the same things apply though in Wichita, Kansas, right? So I assume you guys aren't just isolated. You guys are part of the fabric of the multi-faith community, and interacting with the other churches and stuff there, and doing things, right? It's for
the most part, we were up and down with that. I mean, sometimes I think sometimes the political climate affects how much we're reached out to and how much we reach out to, whenever. Seems like when we have a more Republican institution, then everybody gets more careful and conservative, and then it changes here and there, or whatever. But we used to. I mean, sometimes I say we used to have more interactions, seem like, than we had recently since COVID and everything, and then
it's
haven't kind of recovered from that. But
everybody's rebuilding, I think, since COVID.
And they kind of were fixing themselves up.
Yeah, it's difficult because like I was just talking with Pastor Buck up here, and he's in Lutheran Evangelical and Trinity Evangelical, and like, they're just trying to get $2 million to save the steeple,
right?
So, trying to do that, and he's like, that's all we're doing right now, and so, but and really just trying to get listenership, or people into the church, And so we were chatting back and forth about that, and he's like, yeah, it's really difficult because it's been post COVID, it's like everybody kind of went insular, and
Yes.
it's easy as a Muslim, because if you have a prayer room at home, you can very easily just get caught up in
Right.
your own little situation, and
Right.
then
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah.
and not be part of the community. But I wanted to, I know we're hedging up on our time, so I want to be sensitive to you. I wanted to thank you for taking the time and sharing with us, and maybe have you back to talk a little bit about
Sure.
community care, and how you set education priorities, and then maybe look at some of the other issues. But I
Sure.
I really appreciate you taking the time and being thoughtful in sharing your personal sort of faith journey.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was great. Nice to meet you too, as well, and get to know you. So,
Yeah, no, it means a lot.
yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.